You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
I think you really, in the sport, have to think of it as a long game. You know, it's not just today. It's not just the week that we're in. There's always another show. There's always another week. There's always another class. And I think that's really how I handle it. I have one main horse that does the bigger classes. So for sure, like I could get wrapped up in, oh, I had a rail. Oh, I made a mistake. You know, what am I going to do? And the hardest thing I think is to just stew on that. You know, I think the most important thing is to learn from it, move on, try to fix it next time.
Welcome to the Practical Horseman podcast, featuring conversations with respected riders, industry leaders, and horse care experts. The show is co-hosted by Practical Horseman editors, and our goal is to inform, educate, and inspire. I'm Kathleen Landwehr, and this week's episode is with international show jumper and hunter rider Jacob Pope. Jacob and I spoke in early September as he was preparing for the Longines FEI Jumping World Cup qualifier in Traverse City, Michigan. To give you a little more background on Jacob, he grew up on his family's small horse farm in Columbia, Maryland. He had a successful junior career, winning the 2011 USHJA Emerging Athletes Program Finals, the 2012 USEF Show Jumping Talent Search Finals East, and the 2012 ASPCA Maclay Finals. After graduating from college in 2017, Jacob turned professional and now competes in both the hunter and jumper divisions. He has had top results in several hunter derbies, including winning the 2017 Deeridge Hunter Derby. In 2022, he won his first FEI Grand Prix with Highway FBH. The following year, the pair was on the U.S. jumping team at 4 CSIO3 Nations Cup competitions, helping the team win gold in Uggerhalne, Denmark. In July of this year, Jacob and Highway FBH again helped the U.S. win gold, this time in the $75,000 FEI Jumping Nations Cup Traverse City CSIO3 In addition to his success in the competition ring, Jacob runs Hickory Ridge LLC, a showing, training, and sales business with Nick Pongratz. In our discussion, Jacob talks about what he enjoys about working with horses, his training philosophy, how he handles his show nerves, and more. Before getting into the conversation with Jacob, I'd like to share a word from this episode's sponsor, Kentucky Performance Products. Are you seeing signs of vitamin E deficiency in your horse? Stiff, sore muscles, neurological issues, lack of energy, poorly developed top line, weak immune system? Elevate Natural Vitamin E can help. This powerful antioxidant is research proven to maintain healthy muscle, nerve, and immune functions. Additionally, Elevate is a highly bioavailable source of natural vitamin E that we're excited to announce now comes in maintenance pellets, in addition to its trusted powder and liquid forms. For more information, visit kppusa.com or call 859-873-2974. Now, let's jump right into the conversation with Jacob, where he begins by talking about how he got his start with horses.
So it actually all started with my dad. I tell the story a lot, but I grew up in Maryland on a really small horse farm in Columbia, which is kind of like a suburb. It's south of Baltimore, north of Washington. And my dad rode as a kid. And then as he grew older and, got his own place and whatever, he bought a small horse farm and always had horses there. So I grew up around horses and went off to school. Like even in kindergarten, I went to a school that had horses, and all the way up through 12th grade. I switched schools a couple times, but always went to a school with a riding program. So.
And what do you think it is about horses that have kept you involved with this sport and this career path you've gone down?
I think, just obviously the love of the animal. Like, I've always been an animal person. I have a whole bunch of dogs and love being outside. So, it's not just horses. It's, I think, just loving the sport and, what comes with the sport, being around animals all the time, being outside, not being at a desk job. Like I really love being outside.
So, yeah, it sounds like it's, the perfect match then for you. Can you talk about some of the most kind of influential horses you've had in your life, who they are or were, if they're kind of past horses, what they're like, and why they were influential?
Sure. So I think the horse that really was like a turning point in my career, his name was Uno. It was one of Heritage Farm, Andre Dignelli's equitation horses that I was lucky enough to ride my last junior year. So I won the USET finals on and the Maclay Finals. He was a really special horse. And he just like wanted to win. I feel like he loved competing. I still to this day remember what an amazing canter he had, which I think really made him such a great equitation horse. Um, and like I said, he took me to win those two finals, which really kind of exploded my riding career. So that was probably the first most influential one. There also was a horse named Blink that Judy Richter gave me to ride. She actually trained Andre. And I met her at the Emerging Athletes Program finals that was in Chicago. And she said, if you ever need a place to stay, and that was before I had ever even met Andre, if you ever need a place to stay when you're in New York or whatever, like, feel free to stay with me at Coker Farm. So just small world, worlds collide. I took her up on the offer, lived at her farm in one of the apartments that she had there, and she would give me lessons after my days of being a working student at Heritage. I'd go home and ride a couple horses for Judy. And Blink was the main one that I rode for her. And she was so funny. Judy was an amazing person and horsewoman and all the things. She really believed in me, which was, I think, a really important part of a coach is to have someone that believes in you. And I hadn't really done jumpers much, and she had me do my first meter 20 and my first Grand Prix in the same week. So Blink was pretty special. Um, and we actually were clear in fifth in that Grand Prix, which was pretty awesome. So those were two from, kind of when I was a junior. And then my most recent one that I'm still competing is Highway, who's the horse that I show in Grand Prix that is owned by Sherry Crawford. And he is, I would say, to this day, kind of my horse of a lifetime. I've had him for 3.5 years now, and have gotten to achieve so many goals with him that I never even thought were really going to be possible. So hoping that he keeps going for many more years, but he's a really special horse.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. It sounds like three, great horses and then also great educational opportunities you kind of had in your
Yes,
formative years and
for
yeah,
sure.
continue to be successful. I guess that kind of ties into my next question. In the past few years, I know you've been on some US jumping teams and Nations Cup competitions and have done quite well. I think won two team gold medals at different Nations Cups.
Hmm.
And what has it been, those experiences been like to ride on a team and to compete for your country?
Yeah, so for sure, that was always a goal of mine to be able to compete on Nations Cup teams. And I never really knew how that was going to be possible from my upbringing. Like, I had an amazing upbringing, but I wasn't just given horses to ride. So, it's, I think, sometimes hard to find your way in this sport. Um, and I talk about it a lot, like taking every opportunity. And when the opportunity became seemingly possible to be on some of the teams. I jumped on those opportunities, applied for the teams, and was lucky enough to be picked for them. And it was, not to be cliche, but a dream come true. I've had 5 Nations Cup appearances so far. Sorry. And yes, like you said, we won 2 of them. And it wasn't just going and showing and having a clear round and that being, like, because so much of this is so individual, but being a part of the team, I think, was really the kind of unique aspect of it, and the people that you meet along the way. The 2 teams I did in Europe had different riders on them. I think the 2 that I went to had 3 or 4 different riders each time. So I got to meet new people and make new connections. I got to work with Ann Krasinski, who was our chef de keep. I got to meet the team vets and pick their brain and, continue my learning throughout the whole process while also getting to wear the team jacket, which is, such a unique opportunity also, and something that's just, a lot of fun to be able to do. And honestly, it's like such an honor to compete for the US. So it was definitely a dream come true. And to bring home 2 gold medals was really awesome as well.
Awesome. Yeah, it's just, something, like you said, you dream of, a lot of people dream of, and to have achieved that and done so well, it just, what an achievement that is.
Thanks.
And just kind of like thinking about competitions, we kind of touched on a few, but are there kind of some most important wins you've had in your career thus far?
I definitely would kind of tie into what we just talked about with the Nations Cups. Again, a dream come true being able to just be selected for the teams. But the first Nations Cup we did, which was in Denmark, or that I did, was in Denmark. And there were a ton of teams. We had to, have clear rounds to make it to the second round, and then we came out on top. I would say that's one of my most memorable wins. Also, my first Grand Prix win, which was here in Traverse City, which is where I live now in the summer, on Highway, who's, the horse that I talked about, was quite notable. As well as, I would say, probably when I was younger, the Emerging Athletes Program win, as well as my equitation finals. It kind of, I think, all ties in and really shows kind of a, like, true progression through the sport, as a junior doing equitation, aging out, going to college, becoming a professional, winning my first Grand Prix, and then getting to go on and do Nations Cup. So it's just been a really fun progression, and it's just an honor to be in this sport every day.
No, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, like how you said, what a successful progression and learning and growing in the sport, and hopefully continuing on for many more years and more great results.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And kind of thinking of the opposite, obviously there's a sport, this is a sport where there's kind of also a lot of days you don't win, you can have disappointments. And how do you handle some of those disappointments when you're maybe close to a win, or just it's just not your day or your horse's day maybe?
Yeah, I think you really, in this sport, have to think of it as a long game. It's not just today. It's not just the week that we're in. There's always another show. There's always another week. There's always another class. And I think that's really how I handle it. I have one main horse that does the bigger classes. So for sure, like, I could get wrapped up in, oh, I had a rail. Oh, I made a mistake. What am I going to do? And the hardest thing, I think, is to just stew on that. I think the most important thing is to learn from it, move on, try to fix it next time, and just know, I'm only 30 years old. I'm hopefully going to be able to do this for a while. It's not like I just am shooting for, the Grand Prix next week. It's everything that's building up to that and after. And, just really trying to make sure that you're thinking about the future and not just one mistake that happened that day or that week.
No, yeah, that's a really great point. And yeah, can be easy to get caught up in the moment, but it is so important to think about the long game with horses.
Yeah, I could even use an example in May with one of my horses. I made quite a big mistake in one of the Grand Prix. It was very sunny. The shadows were bad. I don't think he really saw where we were going next. It was like kind of blinding with the shadows, and the horse actually tried to jump and actually stopped and ran out. And it was just such a mess. But it was something that is so uncharacteristic. I was like, that was really weird. And tried to, checked him out, made sure that he was okay with the vet, made sure that he felt fine. And we came back the following week and had a double clear round and a top placing. So, it's like the one week can be, oh my gosh, what's wrong? This was such a mess. And then the next week can be, completely fine. So it's definitely the ups and downs of our sport.
That's so true. And, that was also good on your part to make sure, is my horse feeling fine in every way? And he is. And then, coming back the next week and doing so well. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I mean, I could also attribute it to me making a bit of a mistake as well, but I also wanted to make sure that he was okay. So, and he was. So I think it was on me that time.
Yeah, it happens. and just kind of again, thinking about competition, do you get nervous when you compete? And if so, how do you handle your nerves?
I definitely get nervous. I would say people ask me this a lot. Do you get more nervous for hunters or jumpers, and I think that also depends. I get mostly nervous, I think, when we're competing on the Nations Cup teams, just because you're feeling like if something goes wrong, you don't want to let your teammates down. Um, I get less nervous for like individual just jumper classes. And I actually still get nervous for bigger hunter classes because there's so many more things can go wrong. I feel like, in the jumpers, if you have to slow down or do one extra stride or move up or your horse is cross cantering or spooking or whatever, you can kind of fix it as you go. But in the hunters, there's just so much that can go wrong so fast that I don't know, I get very nervous for that, and like I said, also team stuff, because you want to feel like you're doing well for your country and your other teammates. I think to handle that, I have to make sure that I go through everything in my head, like, why am I nervous? I'm nervous because the 5 is long and my horse doesn't have enough stride. Am I nervous because the water is spooky and my horse is spooky? So if I'm nervous, I have to go through my head and figure out why I'm nervous. Is it because the jumps are big and I'm not sure if my horse can jump that? Is it, did I have a bobble the week before like I did in May and I'm nervous about fixing it? And I'm a very organized, methodical person. So being able to kind of look at why I'm nervous and how I can kind of prevent the stuff from happening that is making me nervous, if that makes sense, is how I go about that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Kind of taking a look and an inventory and just figuring out what's going to be the game plan, for you and your horse for that class.
Yeah, the best way to set us up for success so that then I'm not nervous about doing well.
Do you have a routine before like big classes at all? I know some.
If it's a big class, I always walk the course twice. So that's definitely something that I do. If it's just kind of an open warm up meter 20 or something, I'll just walk once, write the numbers down in my notes on my phone so I don't forget the strides. But if it's a big class, I'll always walk twice. I always make sure that I go through my backpack before I leave the barn for a bigger class also. Um, Make sure that I have all the sets of spurs that I use, make sure that I have the stick that I always carry, make sure that I have extra gloves, stuff, that I just would have to have in my backpack just in case. I always do that, and I always make sure that my boots are polished before I get on, especially for a Grand Prix.
Yeah, that's so important, to be organized before you head to the ring and just so there's none of those last minute, where are my spurs? Where are my gloves? Or things like that.
Yeah, or I have two left-handed gloves. Like this isn't good, So make sure that I have
Right.
extras and yeah.
So, kind of shifting to thinking about training, how would you describe your training philosophy with horses?
So I always say we have a very horse first training philosophy. I think it's very horse specific. Not everyone and every horse fits into one mold. So really trying to figure out, which horse and which rider needs what kind of exercise. You could generalize that and kind of say, the biggest thing that we work on every day would be rideability with the horses and the riders, making sure that they're listening to our leg, listening to our aids, being able to come and go as you please, forward and back, collect and extend, turn left, turn right. That's something that we do every day. I would also say we don't jump very much. Um, the kids who are learning to ride definitely jump a lot more than my kids who jump bigger classes or my horses that are, Grand Prix horses or meter 30 and above or something like that. I barely jump when they're not showing. It's really flat work, going out on trails for fitness, a lot of hill work when we're not in Florida, going out up and down hills is something that we try to incorporate into our training program. But it's, I would say, mostly flat work. And like I said, just mostly rideability, forward, back, left, right. Um, Not to make it like very mundane, but it's if your horses are coming and going and listening, you're going to obviously be the fastest and able to turn tightest in the jump offs and be the smoothest in the hunters. But again, not to repeat myself, but the kids who are learning to ride and that are, um, practicing for equitation or junior hunters or whatever, they'll have probably 1 to 2 jumping lessons a week. But my personal horses that jump bigger really mainly just do flat work.
No, yeah, that makes sense. And kind of having a variety to keep things interesting with their
Yeah,
training routines. And do you have like a favorite exercise with either your students or your horses that you like to do, if it's cavalettes or gymnastics or coursework? And can you kind of explain why it's your favorite and describe it?
sure. So we always, and I'm sure this probably comes up on your guys' podcast all the time with this question, but we do a lot of simple pull work, cavaletti work, and we always have pulls out in the ring or small jumps. The trainer that I'm currently working with for my personal horses, Katie Prudent, always likes to have like small boxes set up here and there with no standards to really train your horses to like listen to where you want them to go. So I always think that that's kind of fun to practice with our kids. So it'll be, a skinny box that doesn't have standards or just a flower box over on the side of the ring and really make sure that your horses are listening to your aids so that they're going to the middle of some skinny obstacle with no standards, which is kind of a fun way to kind of warm up before jumping. But if we're talking about just flat exercises, we do a lot of pole work and cavalettes, like I said, of just lengthening and shortening, which I think, a lot of people probably talk about. Have a 2 poles or 3 poles on the long side and make you do, the leave out and the double leave out and then come back and do the add or start with the add and then do the leave out and then come back and do the add and then make yourself do the regular number so that you're always thinking like measuring where you are. Not only are you testing your eye and trying to feel what's happening underneath you, how big the stride is, how rideable your horse is, but also you're testing your horse as well to see how well they're listening to you. So I know it's probably talked about a lot, 2 poles or 3 poles, and just do different strides in between. But it really is, kind of a very simple exercise to make sure that both you and your horse are kind of on their game.
No, absolutely. Kind of ties back into, like you said, rideability and just communicating with your horse and being ready
Yes.
for, anything in lessons or competition. And
If you can feel what's going on underneath you and you can add and subtract strides, that's how you're going to be the most competitive in the ring. Add to something that's really delicate or leave out to something that's rampy and long, and practice jump offs without having to actually wear your horse's legs out doing jumps. I mean, you can practice being fast over just rails on the ground.
no, that's great. Yeah, it's, simple exercises, but so important, kind of going back to basics, and sometimes can be a little still very challenging, or at least for amateurs, I feel like, to work
Yes.
on. Yeah, and I think you touched on it a little bit, but kind of how would you describe your like coaching style with your students?
So people ask me this a lot, like when they're asking if, they want to come ride with us. And I always say I try to coach the way that I want to be coached. So in general, I'm very approachable, I'm friendly, outgoing, and really thinking, like I said when we started, like our program is very horse first. So never being, overly demanding or overly stern. But at the same time, if I was making the same mistake a couple times, I would want my coach to be like, "Hey, Jacob, like, what are you doing?" Not in a mean way, but I want to be coached the way that I want to coach the way I would want to be coached. So, in general, friendly, positive, forward thinking, but if you need to be, a little bit stern with your rider, I think that is important. And, never mean to the horses is, I think, a really important thing.
Sure, no, absolutely. Or as anyone's learning, yeah, it's kind of sometimes you need some reminders and figuring out why am I making the same mistake over and over? And thank goodness coaches can help us figure that out.
And that's what I would want as a student as well. And I still take lessons. I had lessons on Sunday or yesterday, I guess it was. Yeah. um, to keep my skills, sharp. So, and I want to be coached in a way that's going to make me competitive and that I'm going to respond well to.
So we've answered a lot of my questions. I kind of just have a couple more like wrap up questions and
Sure.
just, yeah. So thinking about the sport, because, we talked about the ups and downs. What do you feel like is the hardest part of the sport for you?
I think the hardest part of the sport is honestly working with horses that are so unpredictable, not only with their, day to day kind of different moods and everything, but also like injuries. It's not just us. Which is so much different in any other sport. You tear your ACL, you're out for a little bit. Darn it, But the horses, I think it's hard. You get so attached to them. You're with them every day. They're your partner, And I think it's very hard to have horses that you get so attached to, and then they need time off, and of course we're here to advocate for them, so we have to give them the time off that they need. Um, I think that is probably like emotionally the hardest part. And then I think there are also a lot of other hard parts of our sport. Another one for sure being, finding horses. I think that's, a big part of our sport that is tough. And, I at least look towards some of my connections to help me with. Because it's, there's plenty of people that are out there and say, I have this budget, I want this horse. But it's, can you then go find that horse? And I think I'm very good at matching horses and riders. But I'm also riding all the time, teaching all the time. Finding the actual horse is, I think, a hard part of the sport. But luckily, we have good connections and people that can help us with that stuff, whether they're in Europe or scouting horses here in the States. Um, and I think the last part, which I think is probably quite cliche, is just financially. That's like very difficult. And being someone who comes from quite a normal family, like I was lucky to be able to ride and have a small horse farm in Maryland. And by no means, were we struggling to make ends meet, but it was definitely like I didn't own a horse until I was a professional. Like we would find leases or a horse that someone wanted to, just have me pay the bills on. Um, so it's not like I had a string of horses. So I think just even on the entry level, being able to make the sport a little more accessible, I think is something that's really being talked about these days and needs to be at the forefront, which I think it sounds like there are a lot of programs in the works that are helping kids, like the Emerging Athletes program helped me, but I think continuing to develop a pipeline for these kids that have talent, but maybe not the largest bank accounts, to be able to get great opportunities like I was able to get is important.
No, yeah, absolutely. I'm sure. Well, I feel like a lot of people in the industry would agree with you on those with, the injuries that horses can have and finding the right kind of horse, right match, and also just the financial aspect of it.
Yeah.
And thinking kind of, I don't know, like thinking of your career thus far, is there any advice you would give your younger self?
My younger self. That's a fun question, actually. I think the advice I would give myself is to not be in a rush. I thought after I won equitation finals, I was like dragging my feet about going to college, and my parents are both very educated, and they were like, no, like you need to go get a degree, even if you don't use it, but we at least want you to do that. And I was like, oh, do I really have to go? I just want to ride. I just want to go jump Grand Prix. I just want to, achieve my goals. And like I said earlier, I'm only 30, and I feel like I've already, after going to college for 4 years, accomplished so much. And there were definitely days where I was, thinking I'm sitting in class and I'm not jumping a Grand Prix this week, or I'm just graduating college and I'm just starting out as a professional and I'm 23. And some of these other kids are only 18 and they're starting out. How am I ever going to make up for those 4.5 years? So I think I would just tell myself, take your time. It's not a rush. Think about the long run. Um, the horses will always be there for you. And I said it in an interview not long ago. I think, I've gotten to where I am today, from working hard and taking every opportunity that you can. So I think that's kind of the advice that my dad gave me, and the advice I would look back and give myself is all the same things, but don't rush.
No, that's so true. If you kind of have things you're hoping to achieve and goals on your mind, that it feels like sometimes it can feel like you're behind schedule, but really
And
it's
that's completely how I felt. I mean, it was like, yeah, I'm sitting in class, and my friends who maybe did online college or didn't go, were kind of, I felt like getting a jump start on their career that I was kind of waiting to do until after college. But I think it was an important move to go there. And yeah, I still am doing exactly what I was hoping to be doing. So,
even though those past feelings of being behind and now kind of,
yeah,
wow, you've achieved a lot of great things, like you said, at 30.
thanks.
Yeah. Um, so what's next for you and your horses?
So I'm actually jumping the World Cup qualifier this week with my horse Highway. I've never jumped a World Cup qualifier before, and my coach Katie Prudent, as I mentioned earlier, gave me some homework a couple weeks ago to look up and find all the World Cup qualifiers. Because World Cup finals next time is in Fort Worth. So it's actually on home turf. So it would be really fun if we could maybe qualify for that. So that's possibly a kind of short-term goal. And then my longer-term goals are to continue kind of doing what I'm doing with trying to develop a string of horses that I can jump bigger classes on, and hope to continue jumping on some Nations Cup teams, which I think is, been a really fulfilling part of my journey so far. So I'm hoping to continue to do that. As well as maybe try World Cup finals somewhere in the near future.
Like you said, it would be, also kind of convenient being on home soil and.
Yeah, exactly. We just have to ship to Texas instead of Switzerland or somewhere. But that would be really exciting. I'm not, getting my hopes up yet because I haven't even jumped a World Cup qualifier yet. But this week we'll see if I can do it.
Well, hopefully it goes well, and
I hope
maybe
so.
others come down the line, continuing with your homework.
Yes.
So those are all my questions. I don't know if there's anything else you would like to add that kind of comes to mind, or just kind of a final thought or anything.
Yeah, no, I just think, this has been a really fun kind of conversation with you, looking back at some early stages of my career and where I've gotten to today. And, just really thinking about thanking all the horses that have gotten me here, as well as the coaches that have put their time and soul into helping me become the rider I am today, as well as my parents, because they're pretty special too. So just really, I don't know, some final thank yous to wrap it up.
Thank you for listening to this week's conversation with Jacob Pope, and a big thank you to this episode's sponsor, Kentucky Performance Products. Learn more at kppusa.com. You can subscribe to the Practical Horseman podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. While you're there, please rate and review the show. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Kathleen Landwehr, and you've been listening to the Practical Horseman podcast.